Evlondo Cooper is a senior researcher with Media Matters of America.
Even in historic record years of coverage, like last year and the year before, the coverage still only amounted to approximately 1% of overall coverage. News should not be about ratings. It should be about bringing what's pertinent, what's urgent to people and giving them the information they need to make important decisions about their lives. You know, with the extreme weather, you get the fire, you get the storm, you get the footage is going to be rolled out. We know how these things are going to go play by play every time you see a really bad extreme weather event. What you don't get the recovery. You don't get the people trying to rebuild their lives. You don't get the culpability of the industries that are driving the climate crisis and global warming. You don't see that part. So these events feel like acts of God, acts of nature. They feel disconnected from anything that an average person can do in their life. But when it comes time to discuss solutions, that coverage is terribly lacking. And I think what it does is it reinforces an idea amongst the general public. People get their news from these sources that, it's almost nothing we can do. The storms and the heat's going to keep getting worse. But what can they do? How can they be engaged?
Hi, I'm Betsy Rosenberg, host of Meet the Solutionaries on greentv.com. I have a question for you. What if, just imagine, if the future fate of humanity and all living things on planet Earth were hanging in the balance, essentially, and there wasn't one program anywhere, ongoing, regular program in America on what we can do about this planetary pickle with solutions to offer? Well, guess what? That's kind of the situation we are still in and have been in all the years that I've been doing environmental news and information shows. And it just boggles my mind that it's 2023, almost 2024. And if you watched the news or even other than an Earth Day special here and there, you don't see anything about what we can do to save ourselves. And then there's the special events like COP28, the one that just closed in Dubai a few days ago. And we wonder, what kind of coverage does that get? Well, we're going to go to the perfect person to find out. Evlondo Cooper is a senior researcher with Media Matters of America. It's one of my favorite organizations. I can't believe it's taken this long to get someone on to talk to us because as regular watchers of this show, and certainly my former radio shows know, this is an obsession of mine because my background is as a media insider, broadcast news, CBS radio for the first half of my career. And I had to leave to cover these most important stories of all. And it's been an improvement over the last few years, but really that's a relative statement. So we're going to jump right in because these stats are right off the press from what kind of coverage we saw at COP28. Evlondo, so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So what's not so pleasant is the state of mainstream news media covering the most important existential crisis of our time, climate and all the related, connected, but not the same environmental threats. And you guys keep track of that. You also watch Fox, so we don't have to. So want to get into, in the void, the vacuum of what should be a lot more mainstream coverage, we have, the disinformation campaign. So let's start with the most recent statistics that you have to share with us and compare it to last year's COP and the year before, perhaps. What kind of coverage we got?
Yeah, so what we saw was a slight uptick in coverage of COP28. Corporate broadcast outlets and major cable news networks aired about 5 hours and 42 minutes of combined coverage about COP28, which was a little bit of a bump compared to coverage of last year's COP27, which received about 3 hours and 48 minutes of coverage. And if you go a little deeper, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say that's for a 10-day event, right? 10 to 12 days. That's crazy.
Yes, there was even an extra day to add it on and for the fossil fuel, but we can talk about that in a bit. But and so if you dig a little deeper, major cable news networks, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News aired about 5 hours and 25 minutes of coverage, with CNN airing the most coverage. As you mentioned with Fox, they aired about 1 hour and 38 minutes, but most of it was filled with mockery, climate denial, and pushing climate delay. Really disappointing.
I would guess all of it was based on what I've experienced.
All of it. Yeah, the vast 99.9% of it was terrible. And
it's worth saying that because that is a big part of the problem. Continue.
Yeah, indeed, it is. And I guess the most disappointing was the corporate broadcast networks, the ABC, CBS, and NBC, across their morning and evening programs aired only 16 minutes of coverage during the study period. CBS had the most coverage, but you're talking about 10 minutes of coverage, versus ABC with 4 minutes and NBC with only 2 minutes. So those are the statistics, the data hot off the press.
How would you characterize those stats in almost 2024 as the window to act on the climate crisis is closing rapidly?
This put us in a pickle, because normally we can say that the coverage was inadequate in time and quality. What was unique about this was, we've been pushing for the national TV news networks to include fossil fuel culpability in their coverage. And so almost, a great amount of the segments actually addressed the role of the fossil fuel industry at COP28. And many of them even discussed their role in obstructing necessary climate action. But again, what we saw was this coverage was sparse and inconsistent, and a lot of it aired outside of prime time, which is when most people are actually watching the news.
I noticed too, when MSNBC or CNN will cover this, it's almost always the last story in the hour, as if it's the least story. I mean, it's all, and CNN does more on it's digital. It's like, what are they afraid of? I guess we can jump right into that. What do you think, and what does Media Matters of America think are the primary reasons for this really diluted coverage that just continues, even though they think they're covering it now?
Yeah, I want to be circumspect here, because I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of important stories in the news cycle. But if you look at our annual climate broadcast study, which looks specifically at broadcast news networks, for instance, even in historic record years of coverage, like last year and the year before, the coverage still only amounted to approximately 1% of overall coverage. So while we recognize that there are a lot of important stories, we do think that climate change generally deserves much more coverage than it gets day in and day out.
So it was a pathetic 1%, what, in 2021, and was 2022 1.3 or something?
Sorry, yes. Well, I mean, it was about 1% across the board. I think last year saw a couple of minute increase in coverage, but I mean, it was still historic amounts of coverage, right? But even contextualizing the historic amount of time they spent on climate change, it was still about 1%. Which tells you how bad it was a few years ago.
On the most historic story of our time. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. What were you saying? The last thing?
No, I was saying it just gives you context for how bad it was before the last 2 years.
What's worse than pathetic?
I don't have a synonym off the top of my head, but it's been pretty terrible across the board.
It has. And when I went to bed Tuesday night, I was depressed about COP and the state of the planet. I just last month became a grandmother, and there's so many things to be upset about in the world: Ukraine, Israel, Gaza. But climate, of course, is getting worse, as all the other stories, important, yes, get covered.
Yes.
The Mr. Climate ain't waiting for us to get around to paying attention, or Mrs. Climate, whatever. Mother Earth is giving up on us, and I don't blame her one bit. So I went to bed depressed. I woke up about 6 hours later, didn't get much sleep that night, to news that there was an agreement and that it was, a breakthrough. So I jumped out of bed. I turned on CNN in the living room and came in and turned on NBC, the Today Show, top of the hour, 8 o'clock in the bedroom, and went running back and forth, as I do when big climate news is on and I want to see if they're going to cover it. And do you know that the first mention I saw, and I had other friends covering ABC and CBS, there really wasn't any real story until the 11 a.m. hour, which is beyond pathetic, right? And guess what? Most of the hour was Hunter Biden.
Yes.
Arriving to court. And then they went from that to Israel Gaza news, and then some fluffy stories. And I'm like pulling my hair out going, what is it going to take? And this was an agreement that wasn't expected, even though it was talk about diluted, far weaker than what it should have been. It still is big news if you care about the future of life on this earth, but you'd never know that. And by ignoring it practically, or sticking it at the end of the hour, or just doing a voiceover, doesn't that send a message to their viewing public that this is not really such big news, not so important?
When you frame it like that, I think it highlights a very interesting phenomenon that we've observed, that you will see somewhat robust coverage of discrete extreme weather events, right? The heat waves, the wildfires, the hurricanes, the storms, the flooding.
Doesn't it? Those pictures, very dramatic.
Exactly. But when it comes time to discuss solutions, that coverage is terribly lacking. And I think what it does is it reinforces an idea amongst the general public, people who get their news from these sources, that, it's almost nothing we can do. The storms and the heat's going to keep getting worse. But what can they do? How can they be engaged to actively seek out solutions and demand political solutions and public policy solutions to address climate change? And I think that's the gap that you're seeing. Yeah. That I don't think it's good for public discourse at all.
Well, it's not an accident, and I can speak to that a little bit because I've been covering environmental news for 25, almost 26 years. If you start count my trash talk green minutes on KCBS in San Francisco, started Earth Day 1997, and then went from garbage to global warming and said, whoa, this is even more important and scarier than trash, what's coming out of our pipes, So that's how long I've been at this, and wondering where is the rest of the world and journalists and public and mostly media, mainstream, especially broadcast, because that's my background. And it's beyond belief. And I have actually pitched directly CNN, NBC, MSNBC, and indirectly CBS and ABC, meaning I did reach somebody and never really got to go in to have a meeting. It was during COVID, but they just made it clear they weren't interested in solutions. That's always been my specialty.
Yes.
Sound solutions for a healthier planet and people was my tagline back in 1997. And
wow.
Yeah, so I've gone to them. I have sent them proposals. I've given them great ideas, shared that I have a vast network of contacts, deep and wide. You can imagine 25 years plus covering the beat. They clearly were not interested, which tells me this can't be a coincidence. There's what I call climate collusion going on. And they will never give a good reason because there is no excuse. CNN did say about 4 years ago when I pushed for a reason, and then of course they label me as, pushy and difficult. I said, why? I'm just curious, because my radio show on Air America, if you can remember that former
Oh yeah, I remember Air America.
Rachel Maddow was on Air America, so was I. One of us went on to become a TV host of great renown. I got discriminated against after Air America crashed and burned when I went to pitch the networks. Oh, it's just that little niche topic you're covering. Those green subjects, we're not interested. I'm not kidding. And like, WTF, right? So I know for a fact they're not interested, and I've given up because they have taken a few of my ideas, by the way. So I'm not going to do that anymore. So it's not a coincidence. And when people get frustrated, I say, this is something that is news. The fact that they're willfully not covering it correctly. And they think they are, which is almost like greenwashing because it's the tip of the melting iceberg. Again, evidence the numbers you just gave, and my anecdotally noticing it's always, late and at the end of the hour, if that. So what do you and your colleagues at Media Matters think is behind this? I get asked that a lot, and I have my own theories, but I'd like to hear yours first.
It's interesting. It's, just as me kind of thinking through it, I think, they do receive a lot of funding from the fossil fuel industry, from natural gas. You'll see the commercials on a lot of these cable shows. We think that it's also kind of I'd speculate that it's a concerted disinterest, right? Now that we have been seeing the hiring of dedicated climate correspondents, CNN has Bill Ware, who we think does a pretty good job, and other climate communicators. But yeah, I think it's a disinterest because I think everybody at this point knows how to fix the problem. And on top of it, the excuse where the public's not concerned about climate, we're seeing poll after poll showing that not only are pretty sizable majorities of Americans concerned about climate change, they specifically want the government to do something about it. And so there's interest, there's concern, and I think maybe it's just some kind of institutional capture where they just can't. They're just unwilling to do the reporting that needs to be done.
Did you mention Bill Weir, the climate correspondent? Yes. I know how that happened. Would you like to hear?
I would love to hear this story.
So we're maybe ambushed Jeff Zucker 2 years in a row at Sundance in the CNN VIP lounge, media lounge, because I was there as press covering the climate movies, the few that were there. And I would talk to him. I would kind of make him, it's impossible for him to run away, literally cornered him. And I'd say, Jeff, you're missing a huge opportunity. When my show was on Air America, it was very popular. It was just me. There was no marketing budget, nothing. And that was 12 years ago. And first time he just said, send me a note, kind of gruffly. And turns out he was going through a bad divorce then. That was like 4 years ago. Okay, so he ignored that. Following year, Jeff, it's me, Betsy. Remember, well, since we talked, there's so much more climate news. Don't you think it's time to have a specific beat? And he nodded, and I gave him all the reasons why. And literally, he was in the back of the lounge at a corner. He couldn't escape. My friend was there running interference. I did this for 5 minutes, right? Because I'm getting tired of this. Like, what?
Of course.
Yeah. But I was polite, of course, and said, "Hey, you started out the Olympics. My first job in broadcasting was the Olympics a long time ago. So, establish a rapport." And he seemed to hear me, and he said, "Yep." I said, "Can I follow up with you when I'm in New York in a couple of weeks?" Yeah, well, if not me, then somebody. I said, "Okay." Followed up, silence, crickets. Well, the following week, guess who got named climate correspondent? The end
No
of
way.
Bill, I swear to God. And I know for a fact the timing, because Bill was on a call with Covering Climate News, and he said, I was approached and said, "How would you like to do the climate beat?" And I wasn't really sure I wanted to do a beat because I like, having general news coverage in my repertoire. And then he probably thought about it, talked to some people, and realized this is the biggest beat you could cover. And he said, "Okay, I'll do it." So can imagine in the following days when I got emails from all my friends in the climate, "Betsy, great news. Bill Weir's the climate correspondent." I'm like, okay, it'll be in my book. I'm writing a book about it. There's a whole chapter about Al Gore, who was no more helpful in my quest. It's called Algorithms, the name of that chapter. But I digress. This is not about me. It's about the problem. So it is true that the fossil fuel, and Bill's a good reporter. I don't want to take anything away from that.
Of course, yes.
People know that story. But if I don't tell it on Green TV, where
you hear it.
Bill Weir. And there's more there, but we'll move on. So it is the industry, the American Petroleum Institute, funding a lot of these ads that, our bright, rosy future with not only natural gas, which ain't so natural, but also plastics now. Have you noticed they've shifted to that?
Yes.
Yeah, now that fossil fuels are getting a bad name, and most people aren't even aware probably the plastic comes from oil, petroleum, maybe. And it's just, I remember during the tar sands back in Canada, like, when was that? Maybe 7, 8 years ago. It all blurs together. I call it Newsheimers. I covered too many stories over the years. But whenever those ads were airing about our clean, pristine, Canadian tar sands extraction, and I was having apoplectic fits in my living room. No, it's not. And people must have complained besides me, because they did stop those ads because it was complete, what. So yeah, that is a big part of the problem. But I think it goes farther than that. And I think what it also is, Van Jones, who I interviewed in 2005 and gave him the name Green Collar Jobs. He ran with that, made a big book, and got hired to be the Green Job Czar in Obama and in the administration until Glenn Beck got him fired. Another story. I have too many stories here. But when I spoke to Van a couple of years later, I said, "Hey, remember where you got that? Hey, Van." I said, "So what is it? What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, to tell you the truth," he said, they can somehow test when they mention climate change, the ratings go down. I said, "Well, wait a minute, since you have no regular programming on climate, maybe Earth Day or something, even if it's a 7-minute segment, which I don't think it ever has been, how can they possibly test the audience reaction?" And he said, "Well, they're convinced that it's just bad for ratings." And of course, Chris Hayes on MSNBC
famously
started a whole viral thread, it's a ratings killer. Well, first of all, I always question that, because my radio show was the opposite. Again, not because of me, because I interviewed the most important, interesting, passionate, knowledgeable experts in their green field. And that's what people responded to. There was no other place doing this. How radical is that? So what he said was, the reason is they don't want to alienate their viewers that go back and forth between CNN and Fox, because they'll go back to Fox where they can be told that climate change is nothing to worry about. It's a Chinese hoax, right? And so I thought, wow, well, that's a really bad excuse too, and another time he said, "Well, it's bad for ratings." When is news based on ratings? I mean, isn't it supposed to be what's important?
Yes.
Critically, it should be more important.
We kind of touched. I do a program produces an environmental justice study, which, shocker, receives even less coverage than climate change. And we spoke to some people, journalists, online and print journalists in the field, who are doing great work. And that's the point they made, that news should not be about ratings. It should be about bringing what's pertinent and what's urgent to people and giving them the information they need to make important decisions about their lives. And we're so far away from whatever version of journalism that is, that I agree. I mean,
yeah, and then they wonder why they're losing viewers. Younger people cutting cables, I'm sure this is part of it. They're not covering what some people who are plugged into this crisis are interested in, right? So it serves them right.
And that's a key point. That's another key point we try to make. Like, believe me, I am well aware of great independent journalism programs like yours that you can find on YouTube and other platforms. But I do think there are key demographics that still primarily get their news, key voting demographics from, the broadcast networks and from cable news. And I think, although the landscape has changed a lot, I still think it's important that those people who vote have the information they need to understand what's happening with climate change, what the solutions are in play to mitigate some of the worst impacts. And I think they're being greatly disturbed
Yes.
By not having that information, especially
Yes.
during critical election periods.
Yes. And it was climate silence for too many years. And
Yes.
then they started connecting the dots, even sometimes during that inferno or hurricane, as I call it, not your mother's storms on steroids.
Right.
They mention it in progress. That's progress. But the problem is they don't talk about the solution. So then people just get depressed and paralyzed. So they think, and so specifically to say no to a show on solutions, what does that tell you?
It tells me they're not interested. I think, like you said, the very famous phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. So, with the extreme weather, you get the fire, you get the storm, you get the footage is going to be rolled out. We know how these things are going to go play by play every time you see a really bad extreme weather event. Which you don't get the recovery. You don't get the people trying to rebuild their lives. You don't get the culpability of the industries that are driving the climate crisis and global warming. You don't see that part. So these events feel like acts of God, acts of nature. They feel disconnected from anything that an average person can do in their life to actually address it. And I think that's key failure.
You touched on another one of my pet peeves. They say natural disaster. No, it's actually unnatural, caused by man, human-caused emissions.
Exactly.
That drives me nuts. And then you're so right. They never follow up, 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years afterwards. What happened? Houston, Hurricane Harvey, how many years was that? Over 5 years ago.
God.
There are people who I hear are still not back in their homes. And these communities that are getting flattened, whether it's Hurricane Ian, you name it, so many examples. These people's lives will never be the same, and you'd never know it. There's no follow-up. So it's sort of like the problem of, I guess I don't watch violent movies, but people bang, bang, you're shot dead, but there's never any, repercussions of that.
No.
And there are repercussions for that, right? Not showing what this does to people. And okay, I'll try to calm down.
No, I totally understand. My wife hears me yelling and screaming all the time. I'm being professional today, but I totally understand your passion and your anger.
And my husband got really tired of hearing me scream at the TV, not only for climate, but Trump, okay, who can't wait to drill, baby, drill. First day that he's dictator. How can we be going through this again? And the fact that that's taking up all the air in the room, air time and air space, and too much air in my brain, which is turning into air because of this insanity. I mean, that's to me that we're still having Trump taking up all the attention as the planet burns. And then Hunter Biden, the Republicans and their fake impeachment. I really do blame the Republicans. And they're the ones who politicized climate change, which of course should never have been politicized. It's a matter of physics.
Well, you touched on another important point. In this vacuum of mainstream corporate news coverage, you have Fox that knows how to flood the zone. So if you're not seeing important segments about COP on CNN, MSNBC broadcast, you have Fox talking about war on hamburgers and just denying that there's actually a climate crisis. I think that's an even more worrisome trend where, if you don't have good coverage to balance out the bad or outrageous coverage, then people that are possibly persuadable are just left on the sidelines to believe that it's no big deal and there's nothing to worry about and nothing that they can do.
Absolutely. And I call them the dinosaurs on the wrong side of history. In fact, I said that to Hannity's face, or actually it was his radio show, but I went on there probably 15, 16 times. And I, of course, would not normally watch Fox, and I was shocked. And this continued. And they're still lying about climate change. And I want to know how they're getting away with that, because people are dying as a result. The nature abhors a vacuum, and especially this vacuum, because it's affecting nature. And as I've been screaming at climate conferences for too many years that I went to, hey, people, if you're wondering, because we'd have wonderful speakers and panelists, and they'd pull their hair out and say, how do we reach the public? Why don't people get more concerned? I'd say, do not overlook the damage being caused as we're sitting here by Fox, and I'd never say Fox News because it ain't,
Yes.
phone news maybe. Fox, thank you for not saying news, is, telling people it's nothing to worry about and that we're a bunch of, liberal tree hugging socialists. It's not funny. Some people say, well, it's just entertainment, Betsy. No, it's not. There are repercussions. They are the number one network, God knows why, still being watched. And so when I attract the trolls or the bots or just the uneducated online promoting green TV, an interview with you, for instance, I get they're so predictable, the memes that they say, and they got it right out of Fox. And they're getting away with it. So I want to know, I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I'm wondering if Fox cannot get away with lying about election fraud or COVID, and you'd think a $786 million suit would have made them think twice about lying. Up to this day, they are lying about climate change and downplaying it, diminishing it, downright denying it. And why is that okay? And who's going to sue them? And if no one does, then I think I have to. Maybe media matters.
I mean, I understand the frustration with Fox, and personally, I think they do a disservice to public discourse. They harm their own viewers. I think it's incumbent upon us to push the other networks as much as we can to provide a counterbalance, because part of what allows Fox to get away with what they do, specifically around climate,
with murder, theft of our children's
yes.
future. Yeah, because people, if they don't think it's real, they won't evacuate soon enough. And that's where I think there's a lawsuit, and they get clobbered by these events that they might have otherwise escaped from.
Right. And Fox is always ready to jump right into that vacuum. And so we need good coverage to plug that vacuum and to drown out some of the disreputable stuff that Fox continues to do.
But we also need to stop their lies, because that's just hurting all of our good efforts, right?
Yeah, I would. Yes, and I know the organization is very focused on pushing advertisers and stuff to get away from Fox because of some of the lies and outright harm they do. I don't have a better answer than that, but the more that we can to drown out their voice or stop them from being able to promote these lies, the better off we'll all be.
Well, the last time, and then I'll stop with my anecdotes, that I was on Hannity's radio show was during Hurricane Dorian, which hit the Bahamas terribly. And
oh my God, I remember that one.
So I was in my living room. I had CNN on in the background with the volume down, and they had me on to talk about the fact that I think this was right after CNN did a 7-hour debate among the Democratic presidential candidates on climate change. And they were mocking that. And I was defending it, of course. And they were mocking the fact that there's, no, this is an exaggerated thing, climate change. And I look up and I see this woman in a field of rubble holding her baby in the Bahamas crying. And something snapped in me. And I just said, how dare you? This is a humanitarian crisis. You're still lying about it. We're going to come after you. We're going to come after your advertisers. And Sean said, oh, what are you going to do? Come up to my studio and take my mic away? I said, no, we're going to do it the American way. We're going to demonstrate outside. So that was during Climate Week. It was September, and couldn't quite organize it quickly enough. But we were out there during Climate Week in September with a group called Truth Tuesdays. You may know about them. Awesome. They protest every Tuesday, not just Fox headquarters in Manhattan on 6th Avenue, but around the country. And these people, God bless them, every Tuesday, even in the rain, they're out there at the noon hour saying Fox lies. And I joined up with them in September and finally got to protest outside. Don't think it did anything, although we got some glares from Greg.
I can imagine.
Some of the hosts. Yeah, you can imagine. So you're right. We need to let networks know. What's the best way to do that? We always try to end our conversations with solutions that our viewers can actually engage in.
I think it's the gift and the curse. I mean, I think right now we're at a tipping point with global warming where anecdotally everybody's feeling the impacts in some kind of way. And I think what you're seeing, like what I mentioned earlier in the public opinion polls, is that even bare majorities of Republicans and large majorities of other folks want something to be done. They recognize that global warming is happening, that it's human made, that it's driven by the fossil fuel industry, and they want their government to address it. So I think the best thing that we can do is to continue to push for awareness of climate change. But like you said, like we've been talking about, giving people solutions so that they can find a way that they can be engaged and taking control of their own life and finding a way to mitigate this crisis. And I think just keep pushing on that, and hopefully it'll break through one way or another.
And we have an election coming up next year, of course. Voting is more essential than ever. I mean, imagine another 4 years of Trump, what that will do. Not just the first day. And that's critically important. And I personally will be leaving the country. I've already said that. Again, my mental health can't take another 4 years.
I understand.
Which Republican candidate? I bet you do. Which of their candidates are good on climate?
Oh no, we've been looking at the debates and keeping an eye on them when there are climate questions. But I mean, that's the thing. Trump is definitely a unique danger. But no matter who you get in the White House on that side, their actual agenda isn't going to be any different than Trump, and then in some instances it may be even more extreme.
Their agenda, and yet they talk about our climate agenda being dangerous. Ramaswamy
in action. Yes. Oh yes. In particular, yes.
But loudly, and I hate arrogance and I hate ignorance, and I really hate them together. It's ugly, right?
Well, he's also in a younger demographic, so to me, it's just completely out of touch with how young people are feeling right now. So I don't think it's a winning message, but I do know that if they had one of them happen to get in there, I think they can do a lot of damage to a very fragile climate policy that we already have in place.
And a very fragile planet right now. Our atmosphere layer is really, thank you for joining us, because I, as you can tell, have paid very close attention to this, and it just blows my mind and drives me nuts that, especially now having just become a grandmother, I started this when my daughter was 2, she's 29 now, and seeing the future generations, in my arms and in adorable flesh and blood, this is very real. And
it is
hard to not get angry. There's a lot of things to be angry about and upset in the world right now. But unfortunately, those war, the invasion of Ukraine and Hamas and Israel, all that, it is taking up a lot of news coverage, as it should. But it's always something that knocks, our ecological reality off the front pages or anywhere in television news, it seems.
Yeah, once these, I think the key difference is, once some of these impacts are baked in, there's nothing that we can do about it, and the window for meaningful change is rapidly closing. So
exactly, and irreversible.
Something.
A lot of these things are irreversible. While people talk about Trump this, Trump that, and the Republicans just think that it's a big joke. And even Nikki Haley, who's a supposed second favorite, she said, I think in one of the debates, well, what about China? What about India? Do you know how old that non-argument is? And guess what? China's beating our butts in terms of making solar panels and electric cars.
Yes, before America can point the finger, we definitely have to address our intransigence and how completely captured many of our politicians are by the fossil fuel industry. So we have no right to point fingers anywhere else until we clean up our own house.
And they do point a lot of fingers in those debates. So not that I watch them. I just have my husband call me if they say anything, ask about climate change or energy, which they hardly ever do. Certainly Sean Hannity. The very last question, I think, was about energy, but God forbid he mentioned climate. So last question, and I'll put you on the spot. What would success look like? What would Media Matters feel like was progress in terms of the amount of coverage or the type of coverage? It seems like it's so far off right now.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of key things. One is connecting the science of climate change or global warming to extreme events, contextualizing with solutions that exist to mitigate the worst impacts, highlighting and featuring the voices of those most impacted from frontline and fence line communities, and having dedicated climate reporters to keep an eye out and they're able to communicate with the public, the science, and the complex policy in a way that's understandable, and just more consistent coverage overall across the board.
How about a dedicated program once a week or even 5 days a week? Or
I wish.
Why the heck not when you think about it, right?
I would love it. I mean,
all the crap on television.
Believe me, something like a dedicated climate program, I think would do so much good for public understanding. I can only hope and wish that it would come about one day.
Well,
but
then
they can start on improving their day-to-day coverage.
Yeah,
That could start.
Our vision is a green news network where it's 24/7. Why not? Given the urgency, given all the problems, all the solutions, and all the solutionaries like you, Evlondo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was
Keep up the great work.
very fun.
So
Thank you so
important.
much.
Okay.